Hey everyone, welcome to the Trendcrusher podcast. I'm Peter K, and on this episode, I've got Chaney Crabb from Entheos. The band released their latest EP, An End to Everything, last weekend via Metal Blade Records. Before we get to my chat with Chaney, I'd like to play a song from the other end of the world, all the way in Australia. The Last Martyr have released an EP titled Requiem. Here's a track from it, Critical Mass. And that was Critical Mass by The Last Martyr from Australia. They've got their EP out, Requiem. They've got digital downloads, a vinyl, pretty neat looking, and also a bunch of merch. Do check the links to all of them in the show notes. Now on to my episode with Chaney Crabb from Entheos. We spoke about their latest EP, An End to Everything. Here it is. Hi Chaney, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Now, I have to bring this up right up front, right? How does it feel to be on the other side of the mic and not having to ask the questions and stuff like that?
Oh man, I like it. Sometimes when I'm in the middle of our podcast, when I'm like asking the question, because Naveen and I both do a podcast together, right? So I can know that he will like bounce off of me to ask questions to the guest, but there's always this thing in my mind, like, how are we going to keep this conversation going, for an hour and a half? And it's really daunting, but it always works. So
yeah. I mean, I'm kind of glad you say that because I've managed to catch a lot of the podcasts on YouTube. And I think there is something to having two people in a podcast because when you all do the episodes, you'll kind of feed off each other and you're like kind of sharing and talking. So that's really interesting. But
Yeah, absolutely. There's also like Naveen, we complement each other in a way. Like he knows if are things that I don't really know that much about, I'm confident that he knows a lot about them and the same vice versa. So it's like you don't have to strictly rely on your own intellect or your own recall, you know? So there's another person to kind of like fill in the gaps, and that's it's really comfortable to me.
yeah, so I'm going to save some more questions I have about the podcast
Mhm.
for later. But as of this moment, we're talking a year later after your album release. Time will take us all, which
Mhm.
I must say is a little like dark title,
Yeah.
uh, and it was a dark album, so to say. But you're back with a new EP, An End to Everything, which is far more apocalyptical and darker. Uh, what's it like? I mean, just take me back, right? Like, are these songs y'all wrote in the last year or so? Are these
Mhm.
songs that were there and you all kind of didn't make it to the album? Tell me a bit about An End to Everything.
Yeah, no, these songs, so they were not written or a part of the album. They came about. So actually, almost exactly a year ago, we were tracking with Mark Lewis. So this is our first release that we've fully gone and written and recorded with someone else and had like a producer in the room while we were making the music. So the songs are all songs that we wrote, I want to say beginning July of last year, 2023, and we recorded them really starting in August through about October. And then Mark mixed the record while we were on tour about this time last year. Um, so the thought with these songs was, first of all, they were the first songs that we were going to go and fully do with another person, like I said. And it was kind of like an exercise in seeing if we wanted to do that for the album that we're writing right now. So our next full length. And it was really like Naveen and I wanted to write 5 songs that could be put out as singles that could have visual accompaniments and you know that we could release throughout a year. Um the original idea behind it was like just to do singles. Metal Blade, our record label, uh sorry, proposed that it became an EP so that it was like a collection of things that we could release. So that's what we did. And yeah, it's just uh, it's not a continuation of Time Will Take Us All. It's not like a predecessor to what we're going to do next, but it was just something that we wanted to experiment with because on Time Will Take Us All, it was a concept record that we wrote for it to flow front to back perfectly. And on this, we just wanted 5 individual songs that, of course, would still fit together, but could be individual singles on their own.
I think so. That's a very interesting thing that you mentioned, right? And the reason I was curious was why release an EP when a lot of what we're seeing right now with the streaming and all of that is singles. So you kind of
Mhm.
answered my question. Uh,
Yeah.
but also, I must give a huge shout out to Mark Lewis because I think this year itself, there's so many uh, bands that he's worked with, or at least in the past couple of years, and a lot of the music is coming out. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Undeath, the death metal
Sure.
act. I was talking to Alex a few weeks ago, and again, they worked for the first time with Mark, and I was like, what was that decision like? But again, and I'm sure you all will have a complete different rationale. But for a band like yours, right, where again, Naveen is someone who's had like such a great career. When you look back, he's played with so many different bands, and you kind of both of you kind of complement each other so well to to an extent where they're like this really compact unit of sorts. And just considering all the capability, how difficult or easy was it now to get someone else involved in the equation, so to say?
Well, so Mark is one of our best friends and he literally lives like I can walk to his house from my house. So we see him constantly. His girlfriend is a very close friend and So working with someone like Mark was really easy because of our relationship with him. And that was a huge reason why we wanted to go to Mark. Another huge reason is because Mark is, as a producer, I think there are many engineers, producers out there who tend to homogenize bands that they mix. They will put the same plugin on a band. They'll put the same, drum replacement samples on a band. They're gridding every drum part. They just, it's like a boxed thing, which works really well for some bands, for sure. With a band like ours, a band like Undeath that you just brought up, bands that go to Mark, bands that are drawn to his production style, Mark is very good at not putting any of us in a box. And I think that if you put Entheos and Undeath next to each other, you probably might not even realize that we went to the same producer to make our records, because Mark's sole goal is to find what makes a band special, bring that out, and make them the best version of their band possible. So with a drummer like Naveen, for instance, who is a very expressive drummer, you don't want to get him in the studio and have him track all of his parts and then completely just grid all of his drum parts, take all of the groove out of his drums. And if we went to certain producers, they would do that. They'd make him sound like more of a drum machine type, programmed drum thing. With Mark, he wants your voice to come out. He wants to pull that voice out of you and have it be the best possible version of you that it can be, because that is what makes bands special. So we had a lot of trust in Mark in that way as well. Naveen, Mark did mix Time Will Take Us All, our last record. He didn't like produce it from the ground up, but Naveen had worked with him because Naveen tracked drums on Whitechapel's album The Valley. And when he worked with Mark, he was so drawn to just the way that Mark tries to bring out the best in every band. Because I think that, in this day and age of millions of techniques and like being the fastest drummer, the fastest this, the fastest that, people can get really caught up in that and let it detract from like the songwriting and just making good songs. And working with someone like Mark, what he wants is to have the band be a cohesive unit. And when Naveen was working with Whitechapel, one thing that he noticed is that they had already tracked the vocals before Naveen went in to track drums. And a lot of the time,
wow, that's interesting.
No, it's fascinating. And it's like a lot of the time, if Naveen was trying to do like some Naveen gospel chop drum fill thing, Mark would reference the vocals, pull those up, and he's like, dude, Phil's doing something really cool here. I need you to just go for a more basic drum fill. Like, let's try that. So those type of things I think can help, when working with a producer, help musicians get out of their own head. So, long story short, it was not hard for us to work with Mark at all. And a part of it is just because he's a really close friend of ours and we already have that repertoire with each other. So we kind of knew what it would be like going in to work with him.
Yeah, I mean, like from what I've seen, especially in terms of my limited experience to seeing studio situations here, and also just watching some of the documentaries that some of the bands put out, right? Like the behind the scenes recordings, it can be pretty intense, right? And either you get it or you don't get it. So it's kind of interesting just to see that dynamic. But also just going back to what you said, right? It kind of reminds me why I kind of fell out of love with technical death metal, because like you listen to any band and they all kind of had the exact same sound, especially the drums, right? And that's one of the things you really expect, considering some of the names that were in the bands, that they'd have like their own unique character, but they all just end up sounding exactly the same, the quantized drums, right?
Right. And I don't know if people realize that they're doing that. We actually talked about this. We did a podcast with Mark about a week ago, and we talked about this aspect that the coolest part of having different musicians play on records is hearing that musician's personality. So-and-so isn't my favorite. Joni Mitchell isn't my favorite singer because she sounds like every other singer in the world. It's because she can hit these crazy notes that are awe-inspiring. And And she sounds like Joni Mitchell, and those records are Joni Mitchell. And I think that, I don't know what it is about the current time that we're in with metal, but so much of it is homogenized between what you're talking about, between vocal techniques. It's like a lot of people are just kind of reaching for the same exact thing. And I've got to be honest with you. 2 weeks ago, Naveen and I put on, I'm not going to say the genre, it wasn't technical death metal. We put on about 20 bands from a specific genre. I could not tell one of these bands apart. If you would have, I can't remember a riff really, but if you would play any of those bands to me, a blind test, I wouldn't have been able to guess who the fuck any of them are because they all sound so much alike and they're all going so much for this like one specific thing that I personally think has already kind of been, you know, explored to a large extent. So it is fascinating to me. Maybe it's because I'm a little older. I'm not an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old who's just getting into this and just wants to sound like all of my favorite bands, And I think that there's a lot of, in many bands, like the personality is being kind of stripped away just to chase this like thing that other people are doing. And I can't really relate to that because I think that the homogenization of metal takes a lot of beauty out of the music.
Okay, I think it's time to kind of shift back to your EP, right? And an end to everything. So I think let's play a track, but before we play a track, what I want to kind of understand is, I think you've kind of quite openly talked about what the lyrics for Time Will Take Us Away was about, right? How did your lyrical approach to an end to everything kind of start, right? Like, was there a point where you were like, and especially the whole thing where you said about it being singles, what was the first song where you were like, you know what, this is a completely new kind of release that we're going to put out?
The first song that was indicative of that was An End to Everything, which is the opening track. When we finished that song, Mark and Naveen and I were like, did we really just write that? Like, that's crazy. Because it was very clearly like a single to us. And what started the lyrical approach on this EP was a very close friend of mine passed away. It was because of drugs, but it wasn't because of his own drug use. It was more because he was an enabler in a situation, and it was very dark. And I was very close to the situation because I was around him a lot. And ironically, just observing the situation is what started my lyrical process on this EP. And while I was writing it, he died. So that, I don't know why that happened. Maybe it was to, I don't know. Maybe I was supposed to write about it, but that's what started it. And that's why it became such an emotional EP for me, because it's tied so closely in with this person who I lost in my life.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. And clearly, you know what, I guess they say, right? Like some people live on through various things and memories. Here's something that your friend lives on to. So
Absolutely.
For everyone else, here's An End to Everything.
Fire
And that was an end to everything of Entheos' EP of the same title. And I've got Chaney from the band with me. Now, I kind of alluded to this at the start, and I definitely want to kind of scratch the surface a bit more. So, you co host the Koppercrabb podcast. And what's that journey been like for you? Because you started out on Twitch and then you're on YouTube. And I think one of the best things I like about watching stuff on YouTube is all I have to do is watch one video, and for the next 2 weeks, I just getting hit up with different kind of stuff, right? So I think I've even got recommended like a video you all did like a year ago, which is really cool. So what's that
Wow.
journey been like? What's any highlights you'd like to mention?
I mean, it's just been fantastic. It took me about a year because I wanted to do the podcast very badly because I'm a huge fan of comedy podcasts. And there's a comedy couple, Christina Pajitsky and Tom Segura, who have a podcast called Your Mom's House. And I just saw them speaking back and forth about like touring and all of this stuff. And I'm like, Naveen and I like conduct podcasts every day after we drink coffee in our kitchen. And I just thought it would be a cool thing to do. So we started 5 years ago, which is insane. I saw it on like my Facebook memories yesterday. And it's been amazing to be able to one, build a community through it. You know, we have a community of people who we call the Golden Lobsters. And just have those people come back, check in every week where we like know them now. And it's been cool to build that community. It's been great to have friends of ours come over and we'll have 2 hour long conversations with them about, frankly, things that I would never really ask them in a real conversation. You know, I can't say that when I speak to, whoever, that I'm asking them about what got them into metal when when we're just hanging out and drinking. But it's cool to be able to have those really long conversations with people and conversations that are much longer than what we'd normally get on a tour, because we only can talk to our friends for like 5 or 10 minutes on a tour. So that has been cool. It's been fascinating. You can see I'm in our podcast room right now. So just like all of the stuff that we've built around, now we own all of this equipment and it's takes up like the biggest room in our house. And so just watching it grow in that way has been fascinating. But it's been, I don't know, it's been amazing. It's just like a whole different world, a world that neither of us really signed up for, but it's just like added this whole new cool extra element. And it's just cool getting to kind of like, you know, break the third wall or whatever and show people what it's like to be in a band and doing what we do for a living, because it's kind of like I never think about it because I've been so immersed in it my entire life, but I'm sure that it's kind of interesting for people to hear about what actually, what goes behind planning a tour. A lot of people don't even know that we have a booking agent. They think that I'm over here emailing and booking shows and doing stuff like that. So it's been cool to like reveal some of that stuff to people.
Awesome. And since you mentioned that, right? Anyone you wanted to get on the podcast but haven't already got so far?
Oh my God, all of our friends. I'm trying it tonight. Like tonight, our friend Dan Briggs, who's the bass player of Between the Buried and
Oh,
Me,
one
is
of my favorite bands.
mine too. And he's staying at our house because he's coming into town. And it's like, we got to get Dan on the podcast. It's like
Nice.
there are so many of our friends who are just deeply embedded in this scene and who have amazing stories to share. And I mean, dude, everyone who hasn't been on is someone that I want to get on our podcast pretty much.
Okay, cool. So definitely looking forward to that. And everyone listening, if you don't already follow the Copper Crab podcast, I'm going to leave a link in the show notes. But
Yeah, please do. So I want to add to that before we move on that one of the interviews that I'm most proud of that we have at this point is with Trevor Strnad. And I went back and listened to it like a week or two ago because Trevor is one of my greatest vocal heroes. And I'm just so proud. And I'm just happy that we got to have that conversation with him before he passed away. Like, so yeah, it's stuff like that. Stuff like that is just a really cool part of having a podcast.
Yeah, actually, that's one of my regrets. I never ended up speaking to Trevor in all the kind of media interactions that he ended up doing. And I think that's one of the things, right? Especially when someone like Trevor passes away, you kind of reflect and realize just how kind of short time is. And it's the same thing. Like I lost a couple of friends a few years ago, and
I'm
it's yeah, it makes you think that like, oh wait, I could have seen their band next week or a month from now, and it never really happened again, right? So it's just one of those things. But
sorry.
coming back to the band, right? One of the things I noticed is you'll have added a couple of new live members there, and I think you posted a photo and stuff like that from your last tour. So what's next for Ethenos? Like, what do you have any plans for the next few months or early next year? Any touring or shows that you can talk
Yes,
about at the moment?
we have a tour. I can't talk about it at the moment because the headlining band is on a tour right now. But we are going on tour in late January, and it's like southern United States, so we're avoiding the snow. So yeah, we're doing that, and yes, we do have new live members. I think honestly, that's one of the advantages to the way that our band runs is that the only two people who we really have to rely on are me and Naveen. And that becomes very dicey when dealing with five different people, five different, personalities, extracurricular lives that they have going on. It's hard to keep a band going. It's hard to get everyone on board for every tour. So, luckily, Naveen and I are in a position where we choose whether the two of us want to do a thing or not. And then from there, we hire live members. And the the live members that we took with us over the summer are Andrew Vioretta of Interloper and Michael Stansel of Allegion. And we most recently, just like a week ago, played a show because Andrew Vioretta also tours with Ingested. So he was on tour with Ingested, and Scott Carstairs from Fallujah played guitar for us at that show. And Michael Stansel played guitar for us as well. And I think that that will probably be the touring lineup for our January tour. So we kind of look at it as like a, Frank Zappa type situation. Frank Zappa hired the best fucking musicians you could ever think of to come on tour with him. And luckily for Naveen and I, we're friends with some of the most amazing musicians in the entire world. Like Scott Carstairs lives down the street from me as well. So it's like we we have friends who are incredibly talented, and luckily they're down to tour with us when their bands are not busy. So it's kind of a cool position to be in because you get to hear different people's take on your music. And hearing Scott play Naveen's solos, he brought like a Scott thing with him. He's a very, when Scott's playing, you can tell that it's him. When Stansel is playing, you can tell it's him. So it's cool to just see like the different ways that people interpret your music and play it themselves.
Well, I always keep saying to friends of mine, or I keep inquiring, right? Like when you're a 4 or 5 member band, is this like a larger marriage of sorts? And all of them look at each other and kind of agree. But with you and Naveen, you're literally are that, right? Where you're like managing it. So yeah, it's kind of crazy just to kind of think. And I get it, right? Like sometimes you don't want to have like a democratic whole thing with 5 members trying to get all of that in place. So yeah, definitely looking forward.
Yeah, I think it's from the beginning, we had like this cute idea that it would be very democratic and everything. But with the nature of, having a married couple in your band, I think that everyone else goes home and they're not talking about the band with their wives or their significant others. And we go home and we're talking about the band all the time. So it just kind of became that over the years. We were the most involved. So it made the most sense for the band to become this. And it works for us. It works really well for us.
For everyone, just to kind of wrap up, for everyone tuned in, do you have any final words?
My final words are just go stream that EP, man. It helps us the most. And thank you to everyone who has listened because this is what we live for. I know that a lot of people out there only think about music like every so often, but this is our whole lives. So for anyone to give us any, moment of listening to us or whatever, it really means a lot to us.
And that was Chaney Crabb from Entheos. Do check out their EP, An End to Everything. It's out right now via Metal Blade Records. I've left their links to digital downloads and also merchandise in the show notes. Before I sign off, as always, do share this episode with someone who you think will enjoy this chat, but also stay tuned for more such chats. I've got a lot lined up in the coming weeks. Follow me on Instagram. I'm Trendcrusher. Also hit follow on whichever podcast platform you're listening to this episode on. That's all for me. See you all next week. Cheers.